This is an interview with Gene Gohlke for the SEC Historical Society's Virtual Museum and Archive on the history of financial regulation. Today is November 21st, 2022, and I'm Kenneth Durr. Gene, it's good to see you today.
Yes, same here, Ken.
I'm looking forward to our talk. I want to go back and talk about your education, which is real interesting. It looked like you got several advanced degrees. And I want to
Yes.
talk about that.
Okay, well, I started undergraduate in 1960, the fall of 1960, at the University of Wisconsin in the Milwaukee campus. And I majored in accounting in those 4 years. I was also in the Reserve Officer Training Corps program. That might be relevant later on. And graduated with high honors in 1964 with a BBA degree, Bachelor of Business Administration, with a major in accounting, and minors in economics and finance.
Okay.
And, at the time, it seemed appropriate to go on to grad school and get an MBA. So during my senior year at UWM, I applied to the MBA program at the University of Wisconsin, the main campus in Madison, Wisconsin, and was accepted. So I started the MBA program in the fall of 1964, and finished. I think I finished the MBA program. I took some summer courses in 1965, so I finished sort of in August or so of 1965. Just as an aside, I took the CPA exam in May of 1965. And later that summer, I found out I got the second highest grade in the nation on the CPA exam. So I got the Elijah Watsell Silver Medal from the AICPA for that. And while I was a teaching assistant during that year in grad school, so I got to work with a lot of the professors in the business school at UW, and talking to them, and with some encouragement from them, they said, well, gee, you ought to really continue on and get a doctorate and stay in academia. So that's what I did. I applied for the doctoral program at UW, and I spent the next 3 years working on the Ph.D. I was a research assistant in the second year of grad school. I worked in the business development part of UW, and then in the third year, I actually got a Ford Foundation fellowship, so I didn't have to teach or do research. I could just work on my studies. And then in 1968, the last year, I had a doctoral fellowship from the Arthur Andersen Foundation back then. So that helped pay for all the expenses, and I didn't have any student loans whatsoever. Of course, college was a lot less expensive then than it is now.
Yeah. So how did you end up getting into the Army?
Well, as I mentioned, undergraduate, I took the ROTC program. So when I graduated in June of 1964, I was also commissioned as a first lieutenant, as a second lieutenant, in the Army. And then I asked for deferments. You could do that at the time, and I guess you can still do that, to go to grad school. And so I had 4 years of deferment. But that was the max. So I had some pressure to finish all the grad school work in 4 years. So when I graduated with the PhD in June of 1968, I got orders from the Army calling me to active duty with after attending some finance school. I was in the finance corps. With orders to Vietnam. So I went to the finance school and after what, it was maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks, shipped off to Vietnam. And was then, well, actually, after I graduated, I taught at the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee campus in the graduate program for a semester. And then I had to report for active duty in December or January of 1969, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how I got in the Army. And then I shipped off to Vietnam and worked as an advisor to the Vietnamese Military Training Command for 2 years while I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
And I gave a talk at the Vietnamese sort of command and staff college. Because of my background, they thought it would be useful to have somebody with some financial background give a speech to officers in the Vietnamese military. And it just so happened that somebody from the Agency for International Development attended that session, heard me talk, and came up later and said, gee, we'd like to bring you on board. So, it wasn't that bad being in China working for Assistance Command. I wasn't fighting, I was more of an advisor. So I agreed to stay on and work for AID in Vietnam. And what I was doing was actually teaching staff from the various Vietnamese companies, the electric company, the airline, the waterworks, about basic accounting and financial management. So I was somewhat in academia for those 4 years that I worked for AID in Vietnam. And, I was then in Vietnam until April of 75, and that's when the Viet Cong marched into Saigon. So I left about 10 days before that there was that transition.
Wow.
It wasn't evacuated. I took a flight out. And, Pardon me?
So you had a lot of experience.
So anyway, that was the Army experience, the AID experience. And then, came back to the U.S. in, I think it was April or maybe May of 1965. 1975, sorry. I took some time off traveling around the South Pacific and Guam, Saipan, Truk Islands, some of the places where World War II was fought. That was very interesting, and it was sort of on the way back to the U.S. So when I got back to the U.S., I said, well, do I want to continue working for AID, State Department, sort of? And I said, well, let's see what else is available. So I interviewed at the Federal Reserve Board and at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was interested in securities in addition to accounting from my early days at the university. I think I opened my first brokerage account when I was 20. And I've been investing ever since. So I've got about 60 years of experience.
Okay. Tell me about that. Tell me about that.
I thought the SEC would. Pardon me?
Tell me about that interview with the SEC. Who'd you talk to?
Yeah. Okay. So I called the personnel department at the SEC and said I'd like to come in for an interview. And I guess given my background, the Division of Investment Management was looking for somebody with my background. So I interviewed with, at the time, it was Sid Mendelson and Dennis Gertz at the SEC. And they liked my background. They liked my interest in securities. And I thought, well, gee, this would be a good place to work. So I filed the necessary paperwork, and in due time, it came through, and so I was hired and started at the SEC in October, I think it was, of 1975, in the Division of Investment Management. And given my background, they thought it would be best if I would be working with the inspection program for mutual funds and investment advisors. So that's how I sort of got into the SEC, got into investment management, and had my first association with the inspection program way back in the fall of 1975.
What was the program like at that point? Was it just kind of cyclical exams and that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was cyclical exams sort of throughout the time I was at the SEC. We never had enough staff in the inspection program, although we asked for it in the various budgets that were submitted during the years. Somehow, never enough money flowed down to hire enough people so that we could do exams of everyone out there every year. I'm not sure that would have been useful anyway. So it was cyclical exams, and I don't remember how often it was, but there were maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 of us in the Division of Investment Management that were overseeing and managing the inspection program. And most of the inspections then, as throughout the time I was there, were done by staff in the SEC's regional offices. There were examination staff in each of the offices, and they were responsible for doing cyclical exams of the mutual funds and investment advisors in the area that office was responsible for.
Right.
So we managed the program, coordinated it, set goals, did whatever else was needed in order to keep the program up and running, and finding problems, if there were any out there, to be found.
Now, the broker-dealer program went back quite a ways. My sense is that the investment advisor program had been developing more recently. Was that the case?
Well, there was investment management division was responsible for investment companies and investment advisors,
Right.
as well as insurance companies that issued variable annuities. And then at the time, I think it was the Division of Trading and Markets was responsible for the broker-dealer inspection program. But there was a big difference, because for investment companies and advisors, there wasn't any self-regulatory organizations, so that the SEC staff was the primary entity that did inspections of those firms. On the broker-dealer side, back then it was NASD, now it's FINRA, Financial Industry Regulatory Association, that was responsible for doing the routine cyclical examinations of broker-dealers. And the SEC inspection staff in trading and markets oversaw those inspections. For example, NASD examiners would go into broker-dealer A, conduct an exam, write a report. The report was available to the SEC staff, and after a month, couple months, whatever time period, the SEC staff might go back to that broker-dealer and conduct an exam as well, and then compare results with the idea of making sure that the NASD staff was doing an appropriate, adequate job of inspecting. So the programs were different in that respect, in that the broker-dealer program was more oversight, and the IM program was the actual doing the inspections. Nobody else was
Right.
there.
Right. There was an Office of Investment Advisor Regulation set up in IM in 78, 3 years or a little over 2 years after you came in. Did that involve the inspection or the examination program?
Well, not really, because the investment management back in 1975, even there was an office of disclosure, and that staff reviewed filings, reports, funds. There was also an office of insurance products, which dealt with all the issues regarding insurance company variable annuity products, variable annuity, variable life. There was a chief counsel's office. There was a rulemaking office. So as the investment advisor population grew during the latter part of the 70s and during the 80s, it was thought, well, why not have a specialized office that focused on advisor issues, hence the development of that Office of Investment Advisor Regulation. So it was just adding another office to or within the Division of Investment Management, because prior to that, the rulemaking office, the chief counsel's office would deal with investment advisors issues as well. So it wasn't really anything regulatory. It was sort of an office, so there'd be specialization staff in investment advisory issues.
Okay.
Of course, that would help feed the examination program too, because we had staff in the division that were very knowledgeable about advisor issues. So if issues came up during an inspection, we could go to that office and say, well, here's an issue. What do you think?
Okay.
How do we handle it?
Okay.
As we would do with disclosure or investment company issues, we'd go to the office within investment management that dealt with those issues to get their view, get their input on how to deal with the issue.
Okay.
So it wasn't, so that's really the way it worked. It wasn't sort of new. It was just sort of putting in one place staff.
Okay, Gene, you're cutting
Oh.
out a so I may have you go back and retrace a few things. We've definitely got signal problems.
I can't always hear what you're saying because the music whenever you talk.
What's that?
This is often caused by an unstable internet connection. Move closer to your computer if you're on Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Well, I'm only about, can't get too much closer. But let's see, what was I going to say?
Well, I just want to you go ahead.
In investment management, I was initially, first of all, for about 2 years while I was there was another person that was responsible for overseeing the Office of Inspections. But that person left, and so I assumed the responsibility for managing then the inspection program. But also because of my background in finance and accounting, it became well known in the division that I was willing to help out anyone else that might be dealing with a new rule, interpretation of an existing rule, or an exemptive application filed by some entity, a fund or an advisor that had financial related issues. So I sort of became a financial consultant to everyone else in the division, which was fine because I enjoyed doing that. And it helped also the inspection process because I could see issues that were coming up, and then if they seemed to have an impact on inspections, I could deal with that and let the inspection staff know in the regional offices that hey, here's an issue. Why don't we approach it this way during inspections? So after a while, I don't know, a year or two in that mode, the leadership of investment management decided that, well, they used to have an office of chief financial analyst, but the person left, I think, sometime in the early 70s, and it never been filled. So what they did is they recreated that office, I guess, and I applied for the position, and then I became the chief financial analyst of the division. And so I had a few staff that were focused on financial analysis as well as the inspection staff.
Okay.
So I had those two programs. So, and I think that was really very, very useful because as chief financial analyst, I was involved in almost every rulemaking, whether it was an advisor rulemaking or a investment company rulemaking that the division undertook during the 70s, 80s, as well as issues that might come up in exemptive applications where a fund or an advisor wanted to do something that was otherwise prohibited by the regulation, but which seemed to make sense, and no action letters. So, as those issues came up, I was involved and could, work closely with the legal staff that were dealing with it and could identify issues, problems, and then feed that back to the exam staff, saying,
Okay.
here's what this fund's doing, or this rule is going to require funds or advisors to do this or that. So here are suggestions on how we should be approaching that during our inspections.
Mm-hmm.
So having that close relationship with the rulemaking office was, I think, a big plus. And I think the same thing would have been true in the trading and markets division, where the broker-dealer exam staff could talk with the attorneys working on rulemaking or other issues involving broker-dealers, and then feed that back into both the SEC's exam program, but also NASD exam program.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the rulemaking that you were involved in. Money market funds were getting hot in this period.
Yes, yeah. It started out as an exemptive application, I believe. Some fund group wanted to create a money market fund, and it had unique issues in that they did not want to mark to market as funds were required to do by the Investment Company Act. Every day they have to value all their securities and calculate the net asset value of the fund and net asset value per share, because that's what the fund shares would be sold for. Because money market funds were investing in very short-term securities, the argument was, well, we really don't need to mark them to market every day. We can simply use amortized cost. If you buy, let's say, a treasury bill above what it's going to mature at, you got to amortize that difference, the premium, over the remaining life. So they wanted to use amortized cost. And after some analysis, it seemed to, and use a $1 net asset value in addition, which means that the $1 is a lot less sensitive to market changes than, let's say, a net asset value of $10, $20, or $30. So there were a lot of financial issues involved with working on that exemptive application. And I was heavily involved with dealing with those issues. I remember doing a couple papers, um, trying to explain why using a dollar, given that they were in short-term securities, made some sense. And so that application was granted, but then other funds wanted to do the same thing. Fund groups wanted to do the same thing. So the staff decided, I guess the commission decided, well, let's do a rulemaking. Let's do a rule that would lay out sort of the same requirements that the exemptive application did for this first fund group. And then any fund group out there, if they wanted to have a money market fund, could follow the rule. And the rule added a couple other bells and whistles, like some fund groups said, well, we want to mark to market our securities, but we want to round to the nearest penny. So it was penny rounding was a part of the money market fund rule as well. And there were limitations on the maturity, that the average weighted maturity that the fund could have, because that would dampen down the impact of market changes in interest rates on the value of the portfolio. So it was, a big effort to come up with that rulemaking. And of course, at the same time, we had to come up with additional things that the exam staff would have to do when they did an exam of a fund group that had a money market fund. They'd have to oversee some of the requirements of the rule to make sure that the funds were adequately complying with all of those conditions.
Would you train people to be specialists in things like money market funds, for example, on the exam side?
No, we never did that because there weren't enough staff to do that out there. So the staff were pretty much generalists. They had an inspection manual which laid out a lot of background information on the various things, various rules, regulations, exam steps. And they also had an inspection outline or checklist that helped guide them during the exam. And there were addendums to the checklist for money market funds that would guide the staff to look at the use of penny rounding, if that's what the fund was doing, and the average maturity, how was that being calculated. There was also an issue about the quality of securities that the fund could hold. Did the fund have adequate steps in place, controls in place to make sure the securities purchased were within the bounds of quality, maturity.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to lay all that out for the inspection staff. And during periodic training programs that we had for the inspection staff, where we would gather pretty much the entire staff, 100 people, 200 people, whatever it was at the time, together, and for maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 days, and go through some of these requirements. So we tried to keep the entire staff apprised of what they ought to be doing for these various types of funds through the training programs, as well as the various materials that were provided, the manual, the outline, and so on.
Okay. Was this a matter of bringing people from the regions into Washington for a period of time? Or did you
Yeah, sometimes in Washington, sometimes we would have these training programs in one of the cities where a regional office was located. It sort of depended on the money available for travel, and Washington wasn't a cheap place for people to stay for any length of time. So it might be cheaper to have it, like, for example, in Fort Worth or maybe Denver.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to these periodic all examiner training programs, at least in the early years of investment management, and I think throughout the time we were in investment management, we would have either semi-annual or annual exam program manager meetings, where just the managers would get together in one of the regional offices, and this would be from managers from throughout the program would all come to, let's say, Chicago, and Chicago staff would host the managers for probably 2 days. And we would go over a lot of the issues that had come up since the last meeting, new rules, exemptive applications, new exam techniques, from findings, enforcement referrals, and typically the director of investment management would attend those meetings, and talk about policy issues, things that the exam staff managers would need to know about.
Okay.
That was an additional type of training that we were doing. And later on, once, when we first started back in the 70s, I'm not even sure we had laptop computers. I don't think laptops were around yet. I don't think IBM came out with their ThinkPad at that point. So we sort of had maybe conference calls with the exam staff. But later on, we would do training programs. We could do it online. People could access some internal site that the IT staff at the SEC would set up, and we could do some training sort of online as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that was another big issue, is when laptops became generally available. We tried to get a laptop for every examiner, and then a lot of the work was the outlines, the manuals were all on the laptop, and as they worked through the various exam steps, they would record their findings on their laptop. We also started then getting what we call downloads of portfolio information from the fund groups and from advisors as well, which we could analyze on the laptops to see whether the investments, one or more of the funds and the groups were making, were consistent with their investment objectives, with the information they were telling investors in the prospectus and things like that. So introducing laptops to the exam program was a big issue for a while there when they first became widely available.
You're talking about working with the exam staff, but you're working down to the regions. Was Jim Clarkson involved in this? He kind of had his finger on.
Oh yes,
on
he was mainly at first he was in the office. Later on, he was sort of the SEC's coordinator for regional office staff, head of regional office operations, I guess. And so he too, whenever we had these meetings with the exam staff, Jim would also attend and have time to talk about broader SEC issues that were beyond just the investment management related issues. So yeah, Jim was a very good person to have around to help us get stuff for the exam program through the executive director's office, and in enforcement cases that the regions might want to bring, he could advocate for the regions on enforcement matters to the Division of Enforcement. So yeah, no, we worked closely with Jim Clarkson.
Okay, so we talked about interfacing with the regions, and I mean the regions were your staff. But how about interfacing with the states? There was an initiative in the 1980s to work where the SEC is working with joint exam with states in a joint program.
Right, and well, we recognize that many states had investment advisor registration requirements. some similar some requirements similar to those of the federal statute, sometimes a little different. And some of the states were doing examinations of investment advisors located in their state, looking at the advisor's compliance with state requirements. So we thought, well, wouldn't it make sense to coordinate with states that had these exam programs? So to the extent we were doing exams in the state of advisors to go in together with the state, and they could look at state related issues, and we would look at the federal aspects of the advisors' operations. That would reduce the burden on advisors, but it would also provide some training for the state examiners, and also just give our examination staff a broader view of what that advisor is doing, because the states would be perhaps looking at things that weren't part of our examination process. So we had a lot of discussions with the state. There was, I think it was NASA, National Association of State Securities Administrators. We had a variety of meetings and discussions with NASA staff in order to coordinate this joint examination program. And then once the examinations were done, the states would give us a copy of their exam report, and we would give the state a copy of our exam report, so that we could all be informed of what was found, what the issues were, if there were deficiencies, how they were being corrected. And so we tried to work with the states in order to both increase our knowledge and our ability to understand what advisors are doing, as well as to reduce burdens on the industry. And we did the same with some of the foreign regulators, where U.S. advisors, many of them had offices in London, in Hong Kong, Sydney, not so many in Germany generally, and not so many in France. So we thought, well, it makes sense if the U.S. advisor is located in the U.K., it might be a subsidiary of the advisor, it might just be an office. We really need to take a look at what was going on in that foreign country by that advisor, since many of the clients were U.S. clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so it made sense to work with the securities regulator in those countries, and because many of those countries required the advisor to register with themselves, with the foreign securities regulator. So to do a joint exam with the Hong Kong Securities Commission staff, with the UK Commission staff, to a lesser extent with the Australian Securities Commission. And there too, we would share examination reports, go in at the same time. We could watch how the foreign regulators, what they did during an exam. They could watch us, what we did. So it was in part learning experience, but it was a good way to oversee what these advisors with foreign affiliates or foreign offices, foreign from us anyway, were doing. So we tried to have as many angles as possible for insight into our large population of registrants. And given the size of our staff, we were not able to visit particularly advisors maybe once, every 10 years or so. So to have some assistance from the foreign regulators, because they would get reports from these advisors, and hopefully they would share with us if there were some particular significant issue that we could learn about it as well through their interaction with the advisors, and likewise with the states.
Was there a point where you kind of took over the exam side exclusively, or were you still working as a financial analyst through the 80s into the 90s?
The entire time then I was in investment management. I did both financial analysis and the inspection program, because I had people that when I moved into this chief financial analyst position, I selected a person to run the exam program on a day-to-day basis, in close coordination with myself. And likewise, in the financial analysis area, there was a person that was day-to-day responsible for financial analysis, and I was sort of managing both programs. But I became very much a hands-on manager. I enjoyed doing the work and getting involved with the issues.
Okay. Speaking of management, you were acting director for a little while, right? Tell me about that experience.
Okay, yeah. Kathy McGrath was the division director, and she left, I think, to go into private practice. And Richard Breeden was chairman at the time. And before he appointed somebody as a permanent division director of investment management, I was probably the senior person in investment management. And just as an aside, over the years, quite a few investment management staff came to view me as the best non-lawyer that they ever knew, because I was very familiar with the regulations and could speak legalese. And while I was in grad school, I minored in law, so I had some background in the legal area. And I guess putting that together with my experience in the division, it made sense that I would be acting director for that interim. That was a lot of work, because I was overseeing the entire division. I was still a financial analyst. I had the inspection program. I had to manage the financial analysis staff. And I think by then, somehow I had acquired the insurance products office. So I had those three offices to manage directly, and then overall the entire division. So it was a busy time.
And did you go and sit before the commission a good bit?
Well, whenever, it was common if there was a rulemaking or an enforcement action, sometimes exemptive applications needed direct commission approval. The process would be where the division staff would provide the commission with the proposal with background information, perhaps meet individually with some of the commissioners, but then at a commission meeting, sit before the commission and summarize what we wanted the commission to do and what the situation was, answer questions from the commissioners, and then hopefully get their approval of whatever we wanted them to approve. And so the director of the division, or in my case, the acting director, was sort of the focal point of those discussions. So fortunately, there weren't too many times during that. It was a relatively short period that I had to go through this, but that too would put added burden on myself to prepare for that and become familiar with the potential questions. And but it was a good time. Let's put it that way. I enjoyed very much working in investment management.
Yeah, so things started to change going into the 90s. And I want to talk sort of big picture. What was behind? I mean, I know this was an idea that Chairman Levitt had, but what were some of the bigger picture things behind the creation of OC?
I think the main driving force was the idea that, hey, we got these two separate inspection programs and trading and markets and investment management. And there were an increasing number of broker dealers that were forming investment advisors that managed mutual fund groups. So wouldn't it make a lot of sense to bring the oversight of those entities together in one office, provide greater coordination among the staff, to just have just a better approach to oversight. So I think that was the main reason Chairman Levitt decided to make that change. Although it was a wrenching change because at least for the headquarters staff, for the regions it didn't make too much difference because I don't think the reorganization applied to them, you know, as such. But for us in the headquarters office, that meant leaving the Division of Investment Management, Trading and Markets, or maybe by then it was called Market Regulation, and setting up this new office, OCIE. But Laurie Richards, who was the first and longtime director of OCIE, was a very, very good person to work with. She understood I guess, the stresses that we were going through, both myself and my counterpart in trading and markets, Marianne Gajala, in leaving the division and setting up in this new office. But I think it improved the coordination between the broker-dealer staff and the investment management staff. Although, most of the examinations being done by the regions, they were all under one regional office head anyway. So they could have coordinated whenever it seemed appropriate without too much ado. But it made sense, I think, bringing the headquarters staff into one office as well. Although, as I enjoyed being in investment management. I had that direct contact with the legal staff doing the rulemaking, the exemptive applications, as did Marianne Gajala in Market Reg.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was sort of I tried to maintain it because it was probably the rare day when I wasn't on the floor that investment management staff occupied, talking to people, just walking around, just being there so people could reach out and say, hey, Gene, I got this issue. What do you think? And so I tried to maintain that close contact with investment management staff because I thought it was very useful to do that. And,
How did you do that? How did you do that? Because OC's got, this, you've got this whole new structure now. You've got this entire office over here. Did you set up systems, or did you keep it kind of informal, talking back and forth with investment management?
Informal. I wouldn't, as I say, I tried to daily, or at least every other day, just walk through the floor that investment management occupied. I knew a lot of the people there because I'd worked with them for a long time. So even if I didn't have an issue, a pointed issue, I could stop in, like Bob Plays, Doug Scheid, Tom Harmon, Mary Podesta, Tom Lemke, all those folks that were office heads in investment management. Just stop in their office and say, hey, this issue came up in the inspection program. What do you think? Or you have, Bob Plays, I think, headed up the investment advisor office. Are you working on something that has inspection related or financial related implications? Can I help? Is there something I can do? So yeah, it was just informal, and I think Laurie was very much in favor of that. I did that as well with the Office of Economic Analysis, the economists at the SEC. I got to know a number of them very well. In fact, two of them and myself had a weekly coffee. We would stop at Starbucks in Union Station, getting off the metro, you walk right past the Starbucks. Later on, when the SEC moved to that area. And, one of us would get 3 coffees and we would sit before office hours and talk about issues that were coming up. So I had that informal relationship with the economists as well.
Talk a little bit about building up OCIE. I've heard stories about having kind of a whole floor all to yourself and it was empty. And you've got to put people in here. Did you hire from within? Did you get a lot of people from outside? How did that work?
Let me see. I don't recall getting a lot of people from outside in OCIE. It was pretty much taking the existing inspection staff that I had supervised in investment management, and they all moved to OCIE. I don't know, about maybe by then there were 7 or 8 people, and then myself, and then I think the same for on the broker-dealer side. The broker-dealer examiners that were in market reg just moved over to OCIE. There were more of them than there were of us in the investment management side, and to the extent we could get additional money in the budgets, we hired additional people, and within the exam program, tried to have not everybody under one manager. So I think there were 2, maybe. I sort of hazy. Maybe assistant directors. I was an associate director at the time. Maybe 2 assistant directors on the investment management side, each having 5, 6, 7 exam staff at headquarters. And then we, I think, divided up responsibilities for the regions among those 2 offices. Say Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle when it was still in existence, probably Denver. Maybe Fort Worth were under one, and then the Chicago, New York, Boston, Miami, Atlanta were under the other office. So that helped streamline things a little bit, and they could pay more attention to the regional offices they were associated with. Because one of the things that OCIE staff did, OCIE inspection staff and investment management inspection staff, would be to review all of the inspection reports that were done by the regional offices to make sure that they seemed to have covered all the areas that were important for that type of firm, that they appropriately handle issues that they found, deficiencies. So, there was a fair amount of work for the OCIE staff, in addition to coming up with the annual budget for OCIE. I think I was responsible for that, pulling that together. I was responsible for pulling investment management's budget together, taking input from the various offices. Always requesting more staff, but sometimes getting it, sometimes not getting it. asking money for other things, for more PCs, and whatever, travel money.
Right. Right. You talk about the staff issue, and clearly staffing and staffing shortage is something you're living with. And you mentioned earlier that figure that you could get to every investment advisor once every 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it was about that.
yeah, and I assume that one of the goals of OCIE was to step that up, was to to do more inspections. What kind of
Well,
did you put in place?
mm, well, that would be hard to do because, as I said, most inspections are done by regional office staff,
Right.
not by OCIE staff, and we would have to have grown the regional office staff, which we did bit by bit over time. But there wasn't all of a sudden a whole bunch of new exams when OCIE was formed,
Right.
because there wasn't, and initially in the first year or two, there weren't any additional staff. It was just staff from the existing offices that were combined into the one office in OCIE.
Okay.
And also most of the new exam staff went to the regions because that's where the examination work was done. Yeah. And with the increase in numbers of investment companies, investment advisors, as well as the size of existing groups, to do examinations became, if you doing a fund group that has, let's say, $1 billion of assets under management, and one that has $100 billion of assets under management, it's going to take longer to do the latter than the former.
Right.
So as the size of the industry grew in terms of numbers of entities as well as the assets under management, the time needed to conduct exams sort of increased.
Hmm. One of the things you did do, there were some high profile sweep exams that were undertaken shortly after OC was created.
Uh, yes, and we did sweep exams in investment management as well. I
Okay.
think after like the money market fund rule was in effect for a while, we did a sweep of money market funds where we just focused on those funds to see how they were complying with the rule. And I think there were several instances, and I don't remember if it was in investment management, where there were dislocations in the interest rate market. Let's say short-term rates shot up in a very short period of time, which would impact the value of assets held by the funds. So if something like that occurred, we might very well decide to do a sweep. And perhaps not all funds, but some number of funds where we would tell the regional offices, okay, for the next 2 months or so, we're going to focus on money market funds, or we're going to focus on this type of fund or that type of fund. And so that means the routine exams of other funds would get pushed back because doing the sweep. But it was the idea of getting information both for the exam staff, possible enforcement related matters, but also for the regulatory staff in IM and in market reg, as to how entities were complying with new rules, new policy issues, things like that. So it had, the sweeps had a variety of purposes. Certainly, first of all, to determine whether the entity was complying with whatever the new issue was, but also to provide feedback to the regulatory divisions as to, well, hey, there's some glitches here, or there's some open questions here that need to be addressed.
Okay.
And we continued to do sweeps as OCIE was formed because those same issues would come up. If there was let's say the insurance products office put in a new rule for variable annuities. Well, we might do exams focused on insurance company variable annuity products in order to provide feedback to the regulatory staff about how things were going. So we did sweeps in IM, we did sweeps in OCIE, and it was usually tied to some new development, but it might also have been tied to some broader issue in the market. Like after, I think, long-term capital management imploded and interest rates went wild, we probably did some sort of a sweep of money market funds and maybe some other types of debt-related funds just to see how they were handling this huge dislocation in the market. Were they appropriately pricing their securities, their assets, and which led into the net asset value of the fund, which was very important because that's what investors paid to get in and the amount they got when they left the fund. So net asset value was always a big part of examinations because that's directly impacted investors.
Mhm.
So sweep would be both regulatory related, but also market development related.
Okay. I noticed that for a while, a lot of these were published. They were, big formal reports, and they were published and disseminated to the public.
Yeah.
Was that?
Well, it was a way of telling the industry, okay, here's a new development. Here's how it was handled, or here's a new regulatory requirement. Here's how it's being handled, and we thought that would be useful feedback for the industry to, but not all of the results of sweeps were made public. I think the soft dollar sweep, the 12B1 sweep, may not have been made public. I don't remember. I didn't take anything with me. I didn't want to trump Mario Largo issue, so I don't have any paperwork.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
So let's just talk generally. You've been over and over discussing the growth of this investment company investment advisor market. What was going on to drive that growth?
Oh, I think there were several things. Well, 401k plans, 403b plans came into effect at some point in the 80s. The government's thrift savings plan, which invested in investment companies, came into being. All of that, funneled retirement money into the investment management industry. Plus, there were very high interest rates in the early 80s. So that attracted a lot of money to money market funds as well as other types of debt funds. And during, just the whole retirement market, as pension funds were formed, and they looked to investment managers to manage the money. So it just was a variety of things. Just the increase in the size of the U.S. economy. People were told to be saving for retirement. Social Security isn't going to be enough. So a lot of money just poured into the to mutual funds, as well as investment advisors, and then I don't remember the year, but exchange traded funds. Prior to exchange traded funds, ETFs as they're called, everything was mutual funds. And mutual funds, you submit an order and you get the price at the end of the day, the net asset value of the fund. So you couldn't set a limit as such. Well, ETFs, the exchange traded funds, were in essence mutual funds that, and most of them were index funds. In fact, they were all index funds at the beginning, traded on the exchange. So you could buy and sell an ETF throughout the day. And you could place a limit order on, like if you wanted to buy a Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund, you could say, okay, I want to buy it at $2 less than the current market price, and you could put that in to Vanguard's system, and if the price got there, you would get your shares. If it didn't get there, you wouldn't. It was just like a regular stock. So I think that also led to many more people investing in investment companies because they could, and also ETFs avoid the capital gains surprises that can come with investments in primarily equity funds, because the way ETFs work, there are no capital gains distributions. For many equity funds, come the end of the year, they're required to pay out most of their capital gains. And so investors can get hit with a huge capital gain distribution, which is fine, but it also has tax implications. So there were a lot of reasons why I think ETFs have really taken off. And there are trillions of dollars in ETFs now.
Mm-hmm. So moving through the 90s and into the early 2000s, then I get, when I look at the records, I get a sense that late trading and market timing, there was all this hullabaloo about the SEC kind of missing it. And shortly after that comes this OCIE effort to sort of formalize a risk-based examination program. Did those two things, was that a cause and effect in any way?
Well, yes. I mean, it certainly had an impact on the focus on risk during examinations, because market timing. In order to see that, the exam staff would have to look at sales and redemptions of funds in a group. And in order to determine whether that seems unusual, know information about a lot of other funds, similar types of funds. Does this fund's purchase and redemption of its securities stand out in some way from similar funds? So identifying market timing in a fund during a regular exam can be difficult unless you happen to run across an email or somebody coming up to you at a water cooler and saying, "Hey, you ought to look at this." But and there were other issues that came up. Investments in derivatives. Some funds were going into derivatives in a fairly big way. Other funds didn't go into them, and there's certain limitations. Funds have a limit on the amount of, quote, senior securities they can have. That is, securities that have a prior claim on the fund's assets.
Mm-hmm.
And just dealing with all these new things out there, it just seemed to me and to Lori, to the exam staff, that in addition to the standard inspection outline that examiners typically follow, they should really see the forest and not just look at the trees. Okay, we're going into this fund group. What's different about this fund group? Oh, they have this fund that's heavily into derivatives. Well, do they have An investment manager is the staff capable of evaluating the derivatives. Can they price it? Can they monitor it? So looking for unusual aspects of a fund group or an advisor or particular activities that the fund might be engaged in as creating a higher risk. And so pay attention to those things in addition to everything else. So you're seeing that you're looking at the individual trees in the forest, so to speak, but you're also seeing the forest and, it opens up this whole other area. So it was something that seemed appropriate to push. I think
Computers,
the exam staff. Yeah, go ahead.
computers are getting more powerful. Did you start to get better tools for tracking bigger movements in the markets so you could look
Well,
at the first?
not really, because I think the best tool would have been this form NSAR. It's a semi-annual report form for investment companies that collected a lot of information from every fund, not just the fund group, but every fund, and was able to, if the database had been built, categorize that information by type of fund. So we could have all funds, let's say, of a certain, let's say, all junk bond funds. Okay, we could identify those and look across the industry participants in junk bond funds and look for funds that had unusual characteristics, outliers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that would help us identify fund groups that might have a problem in that area, might have a enforcement issue in that area, and then focus on them. Again, the risk-based approach. But unfortunately, the commission never had enough funds to build the database or to do the algorithms that go against the database to identify the funds. I know the IT staff hired a small firm to try and do that, but they were sort of incompetent. They couldn't. And we talked to other firms like Palantir, Accenture, funds that could or entities that could build a database and do the algorithms, but never had the budget money to pay for them.
Okay.
So we had all this information, but we couldn't really use it to do the risk-based approach to exams. And I firmly believe, had this database been in existence, because there was an issue or a section of that form that had to do with sales and redemptions of fund securities. So had we had information across the industry on sales and redemptions by various periods of time, we should have been able to identify funds that stood out, that were outliers, and then we could have focused on them. But we never had that ability. That essential component of the risk-based approach never got implemented.
Okay. Something that was implemented was the compliance rule. Did you have a role in that?
Yeah.
You had a big role in that one.
Yeah, I think that was an important initiative because it required every fund group, I believe. Again, I'm somewhat hazy on that, but I believe it required every fund group to have a chief compliance officer and to have appropriate measures in place to assist that chief compliance officer in monitoring the activities of the fund, or at least monitoring risky activities of the fund. And I think that's what I tried to do in that speech I gave regarding duties of compliance officers. Is from my point of view, here's what the CCOs that you're all going to be hiring ought to be doing in order to monitor what's going on and bring to senior management issues that may not be appropriate for the fund. So I think that was an important step toward improving the risk-based monitoring of the industry. Granted, it was each firm had to do it, and the CCOs, I guess, could be compromised. It's not unheard of, but at least there was that requirement to have a CCO, and the exam staff then would focus on, okay, what are the qualifications of the CCO? What are the duties? What sort of controls are in place that this person monitors? What sort of issues have been identified? Have they identified anything that went wrong or that seems to be out of whack? So it was an additional tool for the exam staff to do this risk-based approach.
So it sounds like that really changed in a pretty big way. The compliance rule changed the work that the exam staff did.
We would still look at things, at details, still look at the valuation, calculation, net asset value, advertising, or not advertising. Well, yeah, advertising, 12B1 payments. But yeah, we would probably, and I don't recall how we told the exam staff to interact, but that would probably be something right up front in the exam, is to sit down and have a discussion with the CCO. Okay, what do you do? What have you found? What are the issues that you think this fund group or this advisor has? And then use that to moderate the more detailed work that we would do during the exam. And hopefully we would have access, so the rule would require it, but have access to compliance reports that the CCO got, assuming they got any. If they didn't get any, we would probably have an issue with that. But what were the compliance reports you got? Can review a sample of them, look for issues that were teed up, and if there were issues, well, what was done with it? What have you done about this? Has it been corrected? So yeah, no, that it was a big aid for the examination staff.
Two big landmarks that hit in 2007, 2008. You had the financial crisis, which is the first thing. Did that change the strategy as far as going out and doing examinations was concerned?
I don't recall it changing it. That was the subprime loans, the were funds, debt funds, or even equity funds. Were they into those things? What sort of due diligence did they do before they bought in? Was it a sort of a fictional thing that they bought, or was it a real thing? And how are they valuing these things in the crisis? When the market dries up, how do you value it? You go to fair value, perhaps, where you try and estimate what the value is, and you'd look at, okay, you've fair valued these securities, you've sold some of them. How do your selling prices compare to the previous day's fair value? And if there's a huge gap, well, maybe your fair value procedures aren't so good. So I think we would have looked more at valuation issues because of the financial crisis, and portfolio management issues. So we probably would have focused more on those and less on fidelity bonding and things like that.
Okay. And then the Madoff thing hit. And that was a pretty big deal for OCIE, for sure. I want to talk about some of the first things that you were able to do. I know that a lot of things changed long term, but what happened in the immediate aftermath?
Well, it was introspection as to how could this occur. And I don't recall when the last advisor exam was done of the firm prior to it, all the issues becoming public. But also, what about the FINRA exams? At the time, there was a registered broker-dealer there, so FINRA should have been doing exams of the registered broker-dealer on a cyclical basis. What were the findings of their most recent exam? Did they recognize the additional risks that may have come up by Madoff being both an advisor and a broker-dealer and having advisory clients at the broker-dealer, or securities of the advisor clients held by the broker-dealer? If an advisor is not a broker-dealer and has custody of client securities, that is, they can go to wherever the securities are held, a bank, a broker, whatever, a depository, and conduct transactions in the client's account without getting prior client approval, then the advisor has custody, and the advisor would need to get an independent audit or count of its securities, of its client securities on an annual basis. Well, in Madoff's case, the securities are at the broker, so the advisor didn't have to have, if I recall correctly, one of those independent audits. So it really came back to FINRA doing the exam of the broker dealer, and why didn't they see that the securities weren't there? All the securities that should have been there weren't there. I don't know.
Right. So you get this asset verification push that must have complicated the exams in the aftermath.
Well, yes, it hugely complicated them because that's a lot of work. For an investment advisor, that would mean the exam staff sending a confirmation request to one or more custodians that hold client securities, asking them to, as of a date, what are you holding for clients of this advisor, getting that information back, and then comparing it to the advisor's records and statements sent to clients, and maybe confirming some of the assets with clients just to make sure that they know what they or what they think they have, and comparing all that stuff, and the volume was significant. So it created a lot more work for the exam staff, but it's something that I think was important to do because and not only for investment advisors, but for broker dealers too, to have FINRA staff, and to the extent the SEC is doing an oversight exam of a broker dealer, to go to a depository trust company and ask DTC to confirm, okay, what does this broker hold in your record, on your records, and compare that to the broker's records, compare that to statements sent to clients, and make sure that's all consistent. So that's a huge amount of work, but it really is something that should be done, particularly where there are additional risks, such as where the broker dealer is also the advisor.
One of the things that this did free up some resources. So I know that OC got the ability to hire some new people and to staff up a good bit. And I believe you were still there when that was happening. Do you remember that process and what the challenges were?
Well, I think it would probably be primarily in the regional offices where that staff went, because they do most of the exams.
Right.
It would be primarily the New York investment management staff and the broker dealer exam staff that would do exams of broker dealers located in New York. So I think most of that staffing went to the regions, and of course then you have the training program or the training issue for all these people. And a lot of the training is done on the job. A new examiner will go with, and exams are done by teams. It's rare that an exam is done by an individual. So it's a team of examiners that go into a firm. And so this new person would work with the existing examiners to learn about the exam process, to learn about what are the issues that should be looked at here, how do we look at them, what are deficiencies, and how do we handle deficiencies. So a lot of it is on the job training. And so presumably after these people were hired, there would have been quite a bit of on the job training. And I don't remember if we had an all examiner training program or not. I just don't recall.
Okay. Well, this has been a great talk. Is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't?
Well, according to your, I don't know. One other thing. I think I misspoke when we talked earlier. When I had that session at Columbia University talking at the Mutual Fund Directors Forum, I think what I was talking about was what directors ought to be concerned about for funds that invest in derivatives. What they should be asking the fund manager about, expertise and understanding the derivatives and pricing and things like that. So that speech was aimed at directors, but it had to do with derivatives, not with sort of the CCO.
Okay. It did get a lot of play, though.
Oh yeah, it was written up. Well, I was, I did a fair amount of speaking, both in investment management and at OCIE, and and I visited a lot of firms too, so I had direct contact with a lot of investment advisors, so I was able to talk to them, and they got to know me. So it was a good relationship because I could get out there and talk to a large group of people and discuss issues that at least I had, things like that.
What
Still there?
made you? Yeah, what made you decide to retire? Was it just getting to be that time, or
Retire?
Yeah.
Well, I'd been at the in April 2011, I'd been at the SEC almost 36 years. I was 69 years old, and the new director of OC, Carlo De Floria, in my opinion, wanted to take the exam approach in a different direction, more process oriented, by the numbers, and less risk based. And I didn't think I had much to add to that. So it just occurred to me in thinking about it that, hey, this is a good time to pack my bags, say goodbye. And sort of a personal thing at the time is my wife was operating a small urban farm for many years. And I would help her out on weekends, but in the week, of course, I had to go to the office, so I couldn't help her. But as you get older, you can do less lifting and bending and weeding and things like that. So by retiring, I could stay home and do agricultural stuff. And sort of, I love tilling the ground. I love working outside, getting my hands dirty, seeing things grow. So I said that's, I have something to go to. If I retire, I can say goodbye to the SEC, but I can say hi to being a farmer.
Yeah.
And so that too was driving me to retire because I say she needed the help, and I had 10 more years after I retired of being able to do the urban farm. So that was a good time. It was a real good time to leave the SEC, say goodbye. I never looked back. I've sort of completely cut off anything with the SEC. I don't follow anything because I'm into agriculture.
Right. Well, I really appreciate your taking a little bit of time to look back with me today. And you can get
Okay,
back
you're
to your.
welcome.
Thanks so
Yeah,
much.
well.